talk about a prop. The Christopher Stahlmann Brewing Company. He just happened to have it in his pocket, right? Very smart. What a fantastic prop for this. Anyway, Stahlmann Brewery, Christopher Stahlmann, 1855. What really hit me when you were talking about this was the fact that the Cellars are under a right-of-way. And Don knows this, and so many people probably have studied any of the land records. The roadway came after the brewery. The roadway came after the brewery. The brewery established here in 1855. West 7th Street is a freeway of the Civil War. And that's what we forget. Fort Street was platted only to what's now Grand Avenue or Old Ramsey Street. And then in 1858, the city asked that this roadway be extended because they actually envisioned this as the city's first Summit Avenue. This was going to be a grand avenue, a grand boulevard of mansions. And Stahlmann was already here. And I am guessing that somewhere in the city records, there is an easement for West 7th Street across his property at the time, as opposed to him building under the street, because the street was not there. That much I do know. So this is interesting. Right here, middle of West 7th Street, you've got all these cellars of the brewery under here. And that's a first for me. I had no idea. I envisioned cellars, but I envisioned them on adjacent property and never directly under this 7th Street. So anyway, 1858 is when they started pushing the roadway out towards Fort Snelling. It took them till the end of the Civil War to complete it. So really interesting. It'd be great to reuse those in some way.
Didn't it, like read in Don's, wasn't it the Indian Path or something?
By the way, yeah, and I didn't explain that. The original Ford Road, this was never Ford Road, this was Ford Street. The original Ford Road followed a path that came about what's now West 7th and Ramsey, cut into Leach Street, went down an alley in Leach Street, and then followed the bluff, followed the river bluff. Pieces of, Don will tell you this in his book too, the pieces, the old Ford Road, Cliff Street, Stewart Avenue, those are the original Ford Road that was nothing more than an Indian path that was improved starting in 1852. And they created, and it was referred to the old Ford Road. In fact, they always said the Stahlmann Brewery is on the old Ford Road, except the road was behind the brewery. It was behind the brewery at the time, not in front of it. And so the old Ford Road, and of course in the 70s when they wanted to rename West 7th Street, they said, oh, we'll just call it Fort Road, its original name. It was never called Fort Road. Fort Road was behind the brewery along the bluff, Cliff Street, Stewart Avenue, and those streets. But but basically think of West 7th Street as a freeway of the late 1850s all the way through the Civil War. They're pushing it out towards Fort Snelling to connect the city and the fort. So anyway, but that was a revelation today to see